Yeah, we all know how wild and crazy the last year of Donald Trump's presidency was, but folks, it was even nuttier than you think. Philip Rucker and Carol Leone have break it all down in their book, I Alone Can Fix It, Donald J. Trump's catastrophic final year. I had an opportunity to sit with both of them to talk about the craziness that took place in the roller coaster this country went on in 2020. Here's our conversation.
All right, let's get right into it. Carol and Philip, I got to tell you, reading I Alone Can Fix It, I'm sitting there as somebody who lived through it, who was there in Cleveland when he gave that speech, when he gave that line, and I'm reading this book and I'm going, I knew it was nuts, but this is really crazy. What this nation went through over the last 4 years with Donald Trump sitting in the Oval Office.
You said a mouthful there, Roland. I'm not sure your question, but that's exactly how Phil and I felt reporting this book. You know, we were covering it in real time too. We were thinking we were doing a pretty decent job of writing about this for the Washington Post and for the public in 2020. But it turned out when we did the deeper excavation, it was so much more crazy, dangerous, and sort of spine chilling, bone chilling to walk through it again with some of the people that had been pretty silent about how frightened they were about Donald Trump's impulses, his idea of governing, and his quest to maintain his grip on power. You know, human lives really be damned.
You know, Philip, it was just, again, just reading the first 100 pages, it was just one after another. And when I think back to just the first month of the presidency, I remember everybody was going, is this what it's going to be like for the next 4 years? And the answer was yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, we all experienced as Americans following the news and covering the news, the chaos, right? The daily and hourly news cycles of one crisis after another, after another, after another. And what Carol and I tried to do with this book, just as we did with our first book, A Very Stable Genius, is kind of hit pause and go back and take readers behind the scenes and let people really see what was going on in real time and in real life. It's so much more dangerous and chaotic and harrowing than we could see in public at the time. But when you sit down with those officials and really recount for the benefit of history what was going on, what the president was saying, what ideas he was proposing, what almost happened that didn't happen because some servant, public servant stood in the way, you start to realize that this country really was on the brink of changing, of our democracy falling.
And the thing that really jumps out, I mean, y'all detail in really the beginning of the book. There's this obviously the pandemic, COVID-19, and if he had probably done a decent job, re-election would have been easy. I mean, so even with all the other stuff, all the other reporting, all the other things that went besides the pandemic, his base was so solid, the Republicans were so solid behind him, folks would have been perfectly fine with him getting another 4 years.
I think that couldn't be truer. I think that's exactly what was sort of fated to happen, was for him to have a second term. The economy was doing great. He was chugging along. Even if the economy took a hit from the pandemic, he was viewed as the defender for such a large portion of America, and Republicans were in lockstep with him. But exactly what you said, Roland, is what the Attorney General, who we all thought was completely beholden and loyal to Donald Trump. It's exactly what Bill Barr said to the president in a very sort of prescient warning in the spring of 2020. He said this chaos surrounding COVID, people are scared. They actually know some people who are sick, and they're watching these news conferences where you give these ideas of bleach injection, or you fight with your aides about whether or not masks should happen. This chaotic way you're dealing with COVID is going to cost you the election. He said he had a foreshadowing, as he told Trump, that he was going to lose just the way George H.W. Bush lost in '92 when Barr was his attorney general. And he couldn't have been more right. It did center so much on the fear around COVID and whether or not the president really knew how to handle or had the toolkit for a crisis.
Philip, Peter Russell was a deputy press secretary for Vice President George H.W. Bush. And Peter was one of my professors at Texas A&M University. And one of the things that he said to me was, he said, Roland, the interesting thing is that the thing that people most like about you, meaning he was speaking of anybody, is the same thing people don't like. And folks, people who supported Donald Trump, black male voters, others, Trump is going to do what he says and mean what he says, and he doesn't give an inch. And both of you right when Anthony Fauci said that is a failing, let's admit it. Failing was not a word Trump was going to let stand. Here was somebody who was so hell-bent on, I'm not going to give an inch, I'm not going to admit failure, I'm not going to say we screwed up, I'm not going to apologize. Even when this man flirted with death, with COVID, it was still, I'm going to play tough, take my mask off, when he was up there clearly laboring, with his breath. And that was the thing that really just jumped out. He could not, in any circumstance, show any level of compassion or concern for what was happening to the rest of Americans. And that's what cost him the election. That's what caused people to say, you know what, this guy's got to go.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Roland, and that's a smart point about Trump's sort of inability and refusal, really, to admit failure of any kind in any circumstance. And I think what's at the heart of it is that he viewed governing as a public relations campaign. Governing was a branding exercise for Trump. He's been a salesman his whole life, whether he's selling real estate or reality television programs or his own political campaign. And when he became president, that toolkit, that kind of salesman's toolkit of bragging and bluster and bullying just didn't work when he faced a real crisis in the coronavirus. I mean, lives were at stake, and his inability to manage that crisis, and also his inability to tell the truth to the American people, to level with folks about the severity of the threat, and to show any sort of compassion or empathy for those who were losing their lives. Taken together, it had deadly consequences for the country. And I think you're absolutely right. That's the reason why, in the end, he lost re-election and was denied that second term.
Carol, you have covered Washington, D.C. You understand power. You understand politics. You understand what happens when you no longer have power. In your reporting, were the two of you even shocked at how Republican Party leaders, up and down, simply did not have a moral compass, did not have, now these are my words, obviously, a moral compass, principle or values, who said, you know what, doesn't matter. He said he's Republican. We're going to go along with it. I think about that New York piece, New Yorker magazine piece of James Baker in September, and where his whole deal is, I'm a Republican, and so, hey, yeah, these things bother me, but I'm going to support, that's who's in power. They didn't care. They just didn't care. It was he was a means to an end. He was a means to being in control.
Well, absolutely right about two pieces there that are so fascinating. I mean, it's not the job of a reporter like myself or Phil to talk about people's moral compasses, but I'll say this on those 2 points you sound out. One, in many ways, Donald Trump kind of blew through the guardrails, blew through the norms of Washington. Law didn't matter, politeness didn't matter, partisanship that was nitty gritty and dirty didn't matter. You know, the basic benefit of the country. When you're governing, when you're a servant in the people's house, you're supposed to care about what happens to the people. That didn't matter either. And what Republicans in the legislature learned was, you know what? Donald Trump didn't pay any price for behaving that way. In fact, all he did was gain more steam and gain more power. You're right about COVID, right? That took him off the rails because people were frightened. And it looked so insane every day on that newsstand where he was giving the press conferences and none of it made sense. But Republicans learned a lesson just as Donald Trump was learning a lesson. There wasn't a political cost to behaving the way he did, to breaking the law, as prosecutors found in the Mueller probe, because he wasn't indicted, he wasn't charged, he couldn't be as a sitting president. And they learned that his vote base was loyal. His voter base was there for him, whether he enacted the policies he promised, whether he told the truth or not, whether he did anything of value for them. As long as he was on a soapbox saying he defended them and he cared about them and he cared about the America they believed in, whatever amorphous thing that was, those voters were with him. So that's a powerful lesson if you're trying to keep your job as a Republican in Congress, because you know you don't have to pay a price for how you behave, and you need the votes that Donald Trump, even after the presidency, still controls, still shepherds.
And Philo, I think we saw that when Donald Trump attacked Senator John McCain about being a prisoner of war. And again, conventional wisdom, oh my God, how dare you? All the people who so-called love veterans and love the flag and revered Senator John McCain, people said, whatever the hell, that's all fine. And that to me, in real time, I was warning people, folks, if he's able to get away with that, you can forget about any of the norms. And I think it was this constant deal in the media. Okay, have we reached bottom? I don't think there was ever a bottom with a Donald Trump presidency. I don't think that even now, even with all the claims of him saying, the election was stolen, there is no bottom. When someone doesn't care, they don't care.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Trump has proven over these years that at least when it comes to him in politics, there is no bottom. And I'm glad you brought up that McCain example. I was there in 2015 in Iowa at the Family Leader event where Trump made those comments about McCain. And I remember watching it and looking at the other reporters who were sitting around the table with me. And we all thought, oh boy, he really stepped in it. This is going to be the end for Trump's nascent presidential campaign. And sure enough, he didn't lose a single voter over it. And it was a remarkable show of his kind of Teflon quality within the Republican Party. And it just speaks to the fact that so many of his voters were making moral calculations. They decided to look past his transgressions, look past the nasty, petty attacks, look past the Access Hollywood video, grab women by the you-know-what, all because they thought he was fighting for him and because they thought they'd benefit from some of his policies, like his tax cuts. They could, somehow get rich, or the rich people could stay rich because of it. And they made these sacrifices, these kind of character trades, if it were. And that's how he ended up getting elected. And I think that's how he thought he was going to get reelected. And it's how he thinks today he might get back into the White House when he runs in 2024, which he seems to be intending to do.
Carol, a lot of media people really got caught up in the economic anxiety storyline. I was one of the people who was saying, y'all, this thing is white fear. My book comes out in the first quarter next year, because in 2009, there was a poll and it asked, are you optimistic about the future of America? And every group except white Americans, majority said yes. September 2016, question was asked, are you optimistic about the future of America economically for the next 10 years? Every group except white Americans, a majority. And when you listen to Trump supporters and Republican supporters, and then you saw the actions, and then you heard what they were saying, even now when you look at this whole brouhaha over critical race theory, which frankly no one even really knows about, so it's not even that big of a deal. I think what Donald Trump did was bring together all of these political forces that we have witnessed over the last 40, 50 years, the Southern strategy, this whole angst, Midwest white working class. Oh, they forgot about you. Oh, it was before it was the blacks in the 80s. Now it's the illegal immigrants. That was his whole deal with Trump. And so we're sort of now sitting in this space where we are moving towards becoming a nation majority people of color. And where he and the Republican Party sit is really at a place of, are they going to be the party, frankly, of white America or a diverse America? Just your thoughts and your reporting, and look at these last 4 years about that thesis.
I think it's a really smart point to hit on. Now, I'm wary of one thing. Donald Trump's supporters can't be summarized as one monolithic element. But
right.
But I like the two pieces you're describing. For example, we have found in our reporting that there is an overwhelming number of white America, especially white male America and white working class America, that feels looked down upon, feels left behind. The economic winds are not blowing their way. They may be the first generation in their communities to see their children do less well than they did. And that is causing quite a bit of angst and anger, fear and anger. And what Donald Trump was able to do, as I remember, Don McGahn, White House counsel, he went to see Donald Trump campaign. And in our last book, we report about how electrifying he found Donald Trump on the stump. He didn't think this mogul guy from New York, this real estate developer, was going to have any appeal to working class white Americans, but he had an amazing connection with them. But here's the other unpleasant part of that connection. While he taps into their anger and their fear about how America's changing, which really means how they're not doing as well as they once were or how they expected to do, he amps up the volume on their fear and their anger. Over the 4 years of his presidency, we heard him say things and especially in 2020, you think you're safe and well. Joe Biden's going to bring Antifa to your suburbs and your communities. What else is that code for? That is code for going to, that is just strictly code for, your white communities are going to be overrun by people of color and dangerous people, violent people. When he was campaigning in 2016 and when he was pushing his border wall in 2017, what was he amping up in terms of fear and anger? He was talking about Mexicans being rapists and killers that were streaming across the borders. Again, amping up that fear and anger, not trying to tap into it and address it, but just increase it so that he could use it for his own political gain. Now, there's another, again, in the non-monolithic piece, there are rich people who believe they're going to get richer by Donald Trump's presidency, and that no doubt benefited him throughout the 2016 campaign, and he believed it would carry him a great deal in 2020. But unfortunately, there were a lot of people worried about whether or not he was going to be able to save them from a crisis, and not sure, in fact, quite convinced otherwise that he wouldn't.
Philip, on the point that Carol just made there, I would often say that you had these three forces that were actually moving down the same path. You had your national security Republicans who believed in the military-industrial complex. Oh, he's just going to just throw billions at the military. Cool, I'm down with it. Then you had the Grover Norquist Republicans who are all about taxes. Hey, fine, this guy's going to cut taxes. Doesn't matter what else he says, we're good. And then, of course, you had your white working class voters who in their minds, hey, this guy's going to fight for us, even though when you look at his trade war against China, it screwed dairy farmers. It screwed folks, the soybean farmers, a lot of those same people. And I remember seeing this interview where there were a couple of them who filed for bankruptcy, lost their businesses, and they said, I will still vote for Donald Trump again. And I'm sitting there going, what in the hell are these people thinking? Where they actually lost their family farm and their business, and they still say, I'm going to vote for this guy. And it was just this. Rudy Giuliani, I remember he said, Trump is our last hope. And I obviously being black, look at that whole thing a whole different way than some other different people. And I think that we, as those of us in media, have to force ourselves to get out of the conventional political world and realize that when folks they're going after their hearts, when they're pushing those buttons, those angst buttons, that we have to factor in race, we got to factor in class, we got to factor in all these different things. And when a Trump comes along and goes, hey, I'm just going to blow through it all, and it creates this whirlwind, and people are left to figure out, okay, what's going on here? And I'm sitting here going, it's actually right in front of us if we pay attention to political history and how other candidates used it to their advantage to gain political wins.
I think that's right. I mean, you're right to point out the racial elements here. You can't separate politics from all of those other factors. And certainly Trump was a master at, the dog whistle, which was, really more of a bullhorn. I mean, he made no bones about what he was trying to communicate and to whom. The one thing we should keep in mind, though, is that the people receptive to that message did not make up a majority of this country. In fact, even when he won in 2016, he won with 3 million fewer popular votes than Hillary Clinton. And he did not have anywhere near the majority of the votes that were cast in 2016. And then, of course, in 2020, he finished even worse vis-a-vis Joe Biden. So, that is not the majority view in this country, but it certainly is a large part of this country, and Trump was very effective at mobilizing those voters through these sort of coded racial messages.
Are the both of you both of you shocked that even after your book is out, even after these 4 years, that when you see folks like Senator Ron Johnson really holding on to the big lie, and these other candidates, and they're changing laws, and you're sitting here going, and I think, Carol, it probably goes to what you said earlier. Hey, there's no price to pay. He basically crossed the line. Everybody is cool, so what the hell? Let's join them. But are the both of you surprised at what you're seeing, that he continues to dominate the party even though he lost?
There's nobody bigger than him right now, Roland, in the Republican Party. He's the standard bearer. If the primary was this week, he would be the Republican nominee for president. He's got that kind of power over voters who still view him almost as a demigod. I mean, let's keep in mind, thousands of them committed a felony almost at his request on January 6th, barged past police, broke into a federal building where there are no trespassing rules, carried weapons as they went. This is not what you're expecting from working class white Americans to start. And obviously the DC wasn't prepared for this. They had this construct that they weren't expecting these folks to start beating up on police, but they did. And that's a lot of power. Again, I've read some of the white supremacist chat room conversations people had before January 6th. They were talking about dying for their flag and dying for Donald Trump. I don't know how much more powerful a bond there is. You asked if we're shocked. I feel surprised, and I don't, because he had a connection. He made them more upset and more angry, more fearful. And that hold is going to be hard to break. The only way it's going to be broken is if the leaders of the Republican Party who represent some of these red states start speaking the truth about what actually happened, what happened on January 6th, what happened in the election. Stop whispering it to Donald Trump and start telling it to voters.
Philip?
I think that's right. I mean, the only thing that surprises me, frankly, is that it took until January 6th of 2021 for one of Donald Trump's political events to turn violent and deadly. We were at a lot of those campaign rallies over the years, and it felt like kindling there. I mean, it felt like at any moment those crowds could erupt in anger and turn their violence on either the media or other people in their communities. And fortunately, that didn't happen very often. I'm just surprised it took until January 6th.
I know this made the next question. I ask all authors this question when they work on books, and I'm sure y'all probably have more than one. If you got two or three, that's fine. What was the wow moment for you in writing this? What was that one piece of research or comment or quote that caused you to literally stop writing and go, wow?
There were a lot. There were quite a few, Roland. I'm just going to try to keep it to two because Phil probably has quite a few as well. I remember when we were learning that in a meeting, Mark Milley was furious because Stephen Miller was telling the president in June that Black Lives Matter protesters were burning the country down. This is, again, right after George Floyd's death, after some protests outside Washington in that weekend. The tension is building, and Stephen Miller is explaining the country's burning down. These protesters are burning it down. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff turned around with all of his shoulder and his arm and said, "You shut the F up, Stephen. You don't know what you're talking about." That's a pretty big thing to say in the Oval Office.
Right.
The other thing that really surprised me and I had to fight to keep my jaw up was when the president said he had no regrets. Forgive me. When Donald Trump, the former president, told Phil and me in our interview in Mar-a-Lago that he had no regrets at all, except for one, that he wished he had unleashed active duty military. He wished he had overcome the objections of his Attorney General, his Secretary of Defense, his Chairman of Joint Chiefs Staff, who were constantly stopping this, and he wished he had sicked active duty military troops on Black Lives Matter protesters.
Wow. Yeah, that's a wow. Philip?
I'll just add one because Carol hit a couple of them there, and I obviously agree with what she said, and she speaks for both of us. But one other that surprised us both was to learn that in the weeks after the November 3rd election, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who's the highest-ranking military officer in this country, a career public servant, a student of history, that he not only heard in Donald Trump's rhetoric parallels to Adolf Hitler rising in power in Germany in the 1930s, but also feared that Trump would actually use the military, would issue an order as the commander-in-chief to try to execute a coup in order to stay in power despite having lost the election. That's how dangerous Trump was in the minds of the leaders of the military, and that's how close the country's democracy came to falling.
It is an absolute fascinating and intriguing read to go through this. I think I read the first 100 pages probably within a few hours on one night, and I'm just sitting there just shaking my head going, my God, what in the world would have happened if we had to deal with another 4 years of this mayhem? It is I alone can fix it. And I think the subhead is apropos. Donald J. Trump's catastrophic final year. Carol, Philip, I certainly appreciate it. Great job with this book. And folks, definitely check it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland.
Thank you, Roland.
Folks, back to our Roadblock Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Seek.com is founded by Mary Spio, a sister. It is a virtual reality company where they have content on their site. Again, Seek.com. They also have their products. They have the 360-degree headphones. These headsets are amazing. Tremendous bass. You can use these headsets for gaming as well. Plus, they have their virtual reality headsets where you place your cell phone into the device to allow you to see that VR content, but also 360-degree video. If you want to get that headphone, get those headphones or the VR headset, all you got to do is use this promo code RMVIP21, RMVIP21. Go to Seek.com to get their products. When you support them, you support us because a portion of the proceeds come back to us at Roland Martin Unfiltered.